Sir, if you sign that page, your whole company takes the fall. The sentence landed in the boardroom like a dropped pane of glass. Sharp, unexpected, impossible to ignore. Amina Carter stood at the doorway in her borrowed sneakers, her visitor maintenance badge hanging slightly crooked against her faded hoodie. She did not belong in a room lined with black suits and polished marble, yet everyone's eyes were fixed on her. The city stretched far below the 31st floor windows, but in that moment, the only height that mattered was the one between where she stood and the place she was never meant to reach. Leon Mercer froze with his pen hovering above the signature line. His board stared at him, then at the girl, then back at the billion-dollar contract whose pages gleamed under the conference lights. Beside him, Selena Mercer stiffened, while Victor Drayton offered a smooth, practiced smile, as if this interruption were nothing more than a child's misunderstanding. But Amina kept her gaze steady. She had seen something they had all missed, something tucked in a quiet corner of page 14, a line of legal phrasing that pretended to be harmless while holding teeth sharp enough to gut a corporation. What she had done was reckless. What she had seen was real. And what happened after would shake both the marble floors she cleaned and the empire built upon them. As the story begins, every listener is invited to settle into a calm space. The world of glass towers often looks serene from the outside, but the truth that rises from the lower floors has its own way of finding the light. With a breath, we follow the girl who stepped into the room where she was never supposed to speak, and the man who almost signed away everything without realizing someone else had already set the trap. The air inside Mercer Capital Group's headquarters always felt a little colder after sunset. Even the lights hummed differently, as if the building preferred the silence of night to the noise of daytime power. That night, Amina Carter helped her mother, Elaine, push the cleaning cart down the polished corridor, their footsteps soft against the endless strip of marble that reflected every overhead glow. It was their routine. One wiped down chrome handles and glass doors, the other vacuumed and emptied bins. Work done quietly, without attention, without questions. The kind of work meant to be invisible. Amina did not mind the quiet. It gave her space to think, to study the world that lived above her mother's pay grade. She often paused beside the display cases filled with awards and market trophies, tilting her head as if the plaques whispered some secret she hadn't learned yet. Her grandfather used to say that every building had two kinds of floors, those built to be walked on and those where decisions were made. Amina walked the first, but watched the second. When she stepped into the copy room that night, she was expecting loose paper and the soft warmth of recently printed sheets. Instead, she found a folder left slightly open in the tray, its stamped cover reading Final Draft Merger Agreement. The name Drayton International Holdings glimmered faintly across the top. At first, she meant to put it aside, the way her mother always instructed, don't touch documents that aren't ours. But something tugged at her, a quiet instinct sharpened by evenings spent watching documentaries with her grandfather and reading through policy manuals when other kids her age scrolled endlessly on their phones. She opened the folder slowly. Rows of business language filled the pages, dense but orderly. She skimmed, scanning lines the way she scanned textbooks at school, until her eyes stopped on a section buried deep. Subparagraph C, line 3 of the liability clause. The phrasing felt too neat, too carefully balanced, the kind of language that pretends to protect but quietly shifts the burden onto someone else. She didn't need a legal degree to sense that something was wrong. The line said that if anything went wrong after the merger, lawsuits, financial disputes, unresolved debts, the entire responsibility would fall on Mercer Capital Group. Drayton International would walk away untouched, a trap disguised as standard procedure. Amina rushed down the hallway where Elaine was polishing a glass wall. Her words tumbled out too quickly, asking whether contracts should ever hand over everything so cleanly. Elaine barely glanced up, too focused on finishing her shift correctly. "Put it down," she whispered. "You want us both out of a job? Don't touch their things." There was fear in her voice, the kind that came not from misunderstanding, but from understanding too well the consequences of being noticed. But Amina could not unsee what she had found. She carried it in her mind all night, repeating the location like a quiet mantra. Page 14, subparagraph C, line 3. The next morning, the building was brighter, louder, and filled with the scent of strong coffee and urgency. On the 31st floor, in a room wide enough to echo every footstep, Leon Mercer sat at the head of a long glass table. His suit was a quiet shade of charcoal, his hair neatly combed, his expression patient as the board finalized the last details of the merger. Selena sat beside him, elegant and composed, attentive to every gesture he made. Victor Drayton sat across the table with a polished grin, adjusting his cufflinks like a man entirely certain the world worked in his favor. Amina should not have been anywhere near that room. She knew it even as she stepped off the elevator, heart pounding, her borrowed sneakers feeling too loud against the carpet. But she kept walking, past interns carrying tablets, past executives whispering behind half-closed doors, past the gleaming sign outside the boardroom. She stopped only when she reached the open doorway and saw Leon lifting his pen toward the line, waiting for his signature. Her voice carried before she realized she had spoken. "Sir, that clause flips the liability. If you sign that, your whole company takes the fall." Nothing moved. Not the executives who had just been whispering. Not Selena, whose fingers froze on the edge of her chair. Not Victor, whose smile wavered only for a breath before returning as if nothing serious had happened. Every gaze shifted to the girl in the doorway, her badge crooked, her hoodie faded, her courage strangely steady. Leon blinked. "What clause?" Amina explained the line she had read. She told him how the structure of the wording made it look routine, made it sound protective, but actually handed over responsibility for any failure. She spoke slowly, choosing every word the way she chose cleaning supplies, carefully, knowing mistakes leave stains. Victor chuckled lightly, calling it an imaginative misunderstanding. Selena said she should not even be here. Someone at the table murmured, "She's just the cleaner's daughter." But Amina did not step back. She simply held Leon's gaze and waited. Leon opened the folder, flipped to page 14, and found the line. His eyes narrowed, his pen lowered. A single breath left him, soft but final. He did not sign. Then he did the only thing his shock could manage. He told security to escort her out. Not in anger, but in disbelief, in the abrupt need to protect order in a room built on certainty. Yet as Amina was led toward the door, she glanced back once. Leon met her eyes, and for a brief, unspoken moment, something passed between them. A recognition that she had seen through a crack in the marble long before he realized it existed. And though his voice had told her to leave, his eyes said something else entirely. She might have just saved him from himself. Morning light slid across the lobby of Mercer Capital Group with a chill that did not match the warmth of the sun outside. It spilled over marble tiles polished so clean that reflections looked almost sharper than the real people walking across them. In one corner of the security office, behind a glass wall that distorted every sound, Amina Carter sat with her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, eyes steady despite the storm tightening around her world. No one spoke to her. No one asked if she needed water. No one explained why she had been brought here. Elaine Carter sat beside her, fists clenched on her knees, the tension in her shoulders heavy enough to bend steel. She hadn't said a word since last night's shift, when a supervisor pulled them off the schedule, pending review. A phrase that sounded polite but carried the weight of punishment. This wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of being watched. Amina had grown up around silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that tells you everything important happens far above your head. Still, she felt something different now. The silence felt personal, like the pause between a question and the moment someone decides whether to believe you. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, finally breaking the stillness. Elaine slowly turned, the exhaustion in her eyes more painful than any scolding. "You should be," she said, voice too flat to hide the hurt. "I clean that building to keep food on the table, not so you can walk into their boardroom as if you belong there." Amina lowered her gaze. "I didn't want to cause trouble. I just saw something dangerous, and I didn't want him to sign it." "I raised you to be brave," Elaine murmured, "but I didn't raise you to be reckless." Before Amina could answer, the door opened. A woman entered wearing heels sharp enough to puncture silence. Her clipboard was held like a shield, and her expression never softened, not even when she said Elaine's name. "Mrs. Carter," the woman said without looking at Amina. "You've been placed on administrative leave. We'll call you when we're ready to proceed." No explanation, no apology. Just a verdict. Elaine rose slowly, gripping Amina's arm with a trembling hand. They walked out of the building without looking back, but Amina couldn't help turning once more as the revolving doors reflected the towering glass behind her. Yesterday, she had stepped into that tower believing she could make a difference. Today, she wasn't even allowed inside. Cold Chicago air slapped their cheeks as they crossed the street. Elaine's breaths came in short bursts, each one tight with worry. On the train home, she stared out the window, her fingers twisting a napkin until it tore down the middle. "Do you regret it?" Amina asked quietly. "I regret," Elaine replied, "that you lost faith in grown-ups doing what they're supposed to do." There was nothing for Amina to say to that, because deep down, she hadn't lost faith. She had simply never had the luxury of it. Their apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon, something Elaine always simmered in water to make the place feel warmer in winter. Amina sat on the couch with a mug of cocoa growing cold between her palms. Elaine sat across from her, scrolling through job postings with the determined silence of someone trying not to panic. A soft chime broke the quiet. Amina checked her phone. An email, from a name she didn't recognize. Harold Finch. Subject: "You saw it too?" She opened it. "I used to work there. I know what you noticed. If you're willing to talk, I'll listen." Her heart picked up speed, but not from fear. It was the sense of a door cracking open in a dark hallway. She typed a reply, choosing each word carefully, then hit send. In another part of the city, on the 31st floor, Leon Mercer sat alone in his private office as the morning bustle hummed beyond his door. The unsigned contract lay open across his desk, its pages fanned like evidence at a crime scene. He stared at subparagraph C, line 3, the line Amina had pointed out, and felt a weight settle into his chest. The language wasn't simply vague, It was deliberate, soft enough to disguise the shift, sharp enough to cut him clean if he missed it. "How did I overlook this?" he muttered, rubbing the bridge of his nose. But he knew why. Because trust can be louder than caution, especially when it comes wrapped in familiar voices. He reached for his laptop and began scanning other contracts associated with Drayton International Holdings. Patterns emerged slowly, phrases too similar, structures that repeated subtly across deals, liabilities that drifted in one direction, but profits flowed in another. A trail he had never bothered to see before began unfolding with uncomfortable clarity. His phone buzzed. Selena. He hesitated, then answered. "You didn't sign it, did you?" she asked, her voice clipped. "No," he said, his tone unreadable. "You're overthinking it. We vetted Drayton's firm. You're letting that girl get in your head." She saw what none of us did. A pause stretched through the line, thin and cold. "Leon," Selena said softly. "She's a teenager, a cleaning staff's daughter. You're really going to question me over that?" He didn't respond. "I'm coming up," she said, ending the call before he could say otherwise. Leon closed his eyes for a moment. The room felt smaller, the walls drawn tighter. He opened his safe and pulled out an old document labeled Mercer Internal, Finch Review. Pages of flagged risks fluttered out, his own initials scrawled beside a few. He remembered Harold Finch, quiet, meticulous, almost obsessive about details nobody else cared to examine. One line from the old report struck him again. "If they plant one signature trap, we're finished." Leon leaned back, the weight of self-realization settling over him. He hadn't just almost signed a bad deal. He had almost walked straight into a snare someone built for him, and a 17-year-old girl saw it first. That evening, Amina sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her laptop open, cocoa reheated. Her thoughts tangled but determined. It felt less like she had stepped out of her place, and more like she had stepped into something too big to ignore. She didn't pretend to understand every line of those contracts, but she understood danger. She understood traps, and she understood the heavy, unspoken truth her grandfather used to say. Sometimes the people who clean up the messes see the cracks long before those who cause them. Her phone buzzed again. A second email from Harold Finch, this time with attachments. Amina opened them slowly, unaware that the simple act of clicking that inbox would pull her deeper into a story that had been years in the making. The next afternoon, the Harold Finch emails sat in Amina's inbox like small lanterns in a dark hallway, their subject lines brief, their tone cautious. She waited until her mother left for a short grocery shift before opening the attachments. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle creak of their old radiator and the hum of the city outside. Amina pulled her knees close, clicked the first file, and let the pages unfold across her screen. They weren't simple documents. They were maps. Crooked, complicated maps of choices and consequences. Each file held fragments of former deals, merger drafts, internal notes, and tax summaries. Some parts were clean and simple. Others were crossed out, highlighted, or flagged with Harold's comments. What struck Amina most was not a single line, but the repetition. The same style of clause, the same quiet reversal of liability, the same language tucked into footnotes or long paragraphs written to look harmless. 4 different mergers, all tied to Victor Drayton's firm. 4 companies that took on burdens they were never meant to carry. 4 collapses within months. Amina leaned closer to the screen, scrolling slowly. She didn't understand every term. Some sounded like they were written in another language, but her instincts caught the rhythm underneath. Each time a company fell, a quiet pathway of money drifted out of the wreckage, quarter after quarter, landing neatly in accounts connected to a shell company called Dusk Harbor Capital. And from there, the trail moved outward into offshore havens scattered across Bermuda, the Seychelles, and Luxembourg. Not the kind of places you choose by accident. She breathed out slowly. This wasn't one mistake. This was a pattern built across years. Amina clicked to the next document. At the top of the page, in Harold's tight handwriting, a line was underlined twice. Some traps look like safety nets until you fall into them. She read it again, then again. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Harold. "We should talk," he wrote, "but carefully." They arranged a call. Amina sat by the apartment window, watching snow gather along the fire escape, her breath fogging the glass as Harold's voice crackled through the speaker. Quiet, older, tired. "You saw the clause?" he said. "Not many people catch something like that on a first read." "I didn't understand all of it," Amina admitted. "I just knew something didn't fit." "That's enough. Most people don't even look." His sigh rustled through the line. "Drayton's deals are all the same. They sparkle on the surface and rot underneath. And someone inside Mercer Capital has been helping them for years." Amina hesitated. "Do you mean Leon Mercer?" "No," Harold said, firm. "Someone else with access. Someone who knows how to hide fingerprints." The image of Selena Mercer accepting a small flash drive flickered through Amina's mind like a warning. She didn't mention it. Not yet. Harold continued. "If you keep digging, you'll need someone with power to protect you. The kind of people Victor Drayton works with. They don't like loose ends." His voice faltered. "Be careful, Amina." The call ended with more silence than words. Amina stood by the window long after the screen went dark. Snowflakes drifted down from a gray sky, as if the world were trying to wrap the city in something soft. But the truth she held felt anything but soft. She kept thinking about the way that boardroom looked, the confidence in Victor's smile, the certainty in Selena's tone, the shock in Leon's eyes when he realized the truth. If they were willing to risk billions, they would not hesitate to silence one girl. But she wasn't the only one awake that night. That evening, in the upper floors of Mercer Capital, Leon Mercer sat alone at a wide wooden bar in an exclusive lounge with a view of downtown Chicago. Soft jazz floated from hidden speakers, and golden lights from the skyline shimmered against the windows. He wasn't drinking. He was watching. Through frosted glass partitions, he saw Selena sitting across from Victor Drayton at a corner table. They leaned close, speaking in tones too quiet to follow. Their body language spoke louder than their voices. Victor's smile was confident, almost intimate. Selena's hand brushed his wrist lightly, the kind of touch meant to reassure or align. Then Victor slipped a small flash drive across the table, pushing it toward her with the ease of someone who had done it before. Leon's stomach clenched. He couldn't hear the words, but he heard enough in the silence. When Selena rose to leave, Victor caught her fingers gently between his, a gesture that meant far more than business. Leon turned away before they could see him looking. His reflection in the mirror behind the bar seemed strangely distant, like a man waking inside his own life. He returned to his office. The city lights blinked through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but the room felt darker than before. He opened the latest alert from the bank's compliance team. There it was again, an attempted transfer of $3.2 million from a dormant reserve account, blocked automatically before it moved. The login credentials traced back to a terminal used by Selena. Leon sank into his chair, rubbing his forehead. Something between anger and disbelief tightened in his chest. He reran the audio file from earlier, a voice message with no listed sender. He heard Selena's voice again, soft and strategic, saying, "He won't question it if I push at the right time." And Victor's voice answering, smooth as polished stone, "If he does, remind him what he stands to lose." Leon listened twice, then a third time. Each repetition stripped another layer of denial, until the truth lay bare beneath the words like a crack running through marble. At that same hour, across the city, Amina walked to the public library with her hood up against the wind. She sat at a computer near the back and opened Harold's files again. Numbers scrolled across her screen, arranged in spreadsheets and charts she barely understood, but the rhythm underneath made sense. Every collapse followed the same sequence. Every transfer led to Dusk Harbor Capital. Her breath caught when she found something new. Selena Mercer's digital approval ID, hidden deep in the background permissions of the 4 previous mergers, buried behind layers of administrative signatures. Quiet, invisible, but present. Amina leaned in closer, her heart hammering. She remembered her mother's words about people like them being used as cover. She remembered Harold's warning that someone inside was helping Drayton. She remembered Selena's voice in the boardroom telling Leon to ignore her. And she remembered the flash drive. Her phone vibrated again. Harold had sent one more message. "Look into Selena's offshore patterns. Dusk Harbor pays out to accounts in her name." Amina opened a new window, searching the public transaction logs she had learned to navigate over the past year. She scrolled, her breath catching when the names appeared. Payments routed into a dormant trust linked to Seychelles, another to Bermuda, and a third branching toward Luxembourg. Her hands trembled. The pattern wasn't just about Victor Drayton. Selena Mercer wasn't clueless. She was part of it. Amina closed her laptop and pressed her forehead against the cool surface of the table. She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't even old enough to vote. But she understood one truth vividly. Power hides behind polished doors, but lies always leave dust. The library lights dimmed overhead, warning of closing time. Amina gathered her things into her backpack, unaware that across the city, someone had already begun to take notice of her movements. Snow kept falling outside. The world looked almost peaceful. But 3 people did not sleep that night. Amina Carter, tracing patterns too heavy for her age. Leon Mercer, realizing betrayal, had been sitting beside him at dinner. Selena Mercer, waiting for Victor's call in a dark corner of a high-rise, whispering, "He's starting to dig." Victor's answer, low and calm, settled like frost on a window. "Then we bury him before he reaches the roots." Night settled over the city like a heavy coat, thick and muffling, but it did nothing to calm the 3 people whose thoughts refused to rest. Snow drifted past street lamps in slow spirals, soft enough to look peaceful, yet the world beneath those flakes churned with truths sharpening themselves in silence. In the Carter apartment, Amina sat cross-legged on the floor beside the old radiator, its warm breath filling the room with a faint metallic scent. Papers and printed emails covered the carpet in uneven stacks. Her laptop screen glowed against her face as she moved through Harold Finch's documents for the 3rd time. Eyes trained on patterns only someone who paid attention to the smallest details would notice. She highlighted phrases gently, the yellow ink pooling over words like indemnification and burden of performance. Terms she couldn't define formally, but whose tone she already understood. They were the kind of phrases people used when they wanted responsibility to look tidy, while quietly shifting its weight onto someone else. She whispered them aloud, as if hearing the words made them easier to decode. Burden, performance, contingent. They tasted like caution. They tasted like warning. Elaine watched her from the kitchen doorway, arms folded but expression soft. She had lived long enough to know that some daughters are born with a stubborn streak of truth-telling, the kind that pushes them into rooms they were never meant to enter. It frightened her, not because Amina was wrong, but because she might be right. She stepped forward and set a mug of chamomile tea beside her daughter. "You need to sleep," Elaine murmured. Amina shook her head. "If I stop now, they'll finish whatever they've started. Someone needs to keep looking." Elaine's sigh floated across the room like steam. She sat beside her daughter on the floor, passing her warmth through a gentle shoulder lean. "The powerful always think people like us will stay quiet," she whispered. "And maybe most do. But maybe not you." Amina didn't answer. She simply rested her head briefly against her mother's arm before returning to the screen. Across town, in a private office lit only by the glow of a desk lamp, Leon Mercer sat hunched over a folder of financial printouts. The documents formed a jagged outline across his mahogany desk, each page a reminder of how deeply he had trusted the wrong people. He picked up the unsigned contract again, tracing his finger along the words as if they could confess their intentions. Subparagraph C, line 3. Each time he read it, he felt the trap more clearly. The sentence was crafted with surgical precision, written to look harmless, to look like standard procedure. But reading the language now, knowing what he knew, made his stomach twist. He opened Harold Finch's old risk reports again. 3-year-old memos marked with red ink, circles around key phrases, notes in the margin warning that one shift, one subtle clause, could destroy everything. Back then, Leon had thought Harold dramatic. Now he saw him as the one person who had been paying attention. He rubbed his temples, then reached into his drawer for the phone he rarely used, a private line known only to a few. He replayed the audio file he had received earlier. Selena's voice drifted through the speaker, calm and deliberate. "He won't question it. If I push at the right time, he'll sign." Victor Drayton's voice followed, smooth and low. "And if he does question it, remind him what he stands to lose." Leon's heartbeat tightened. He replayed it again. Each repetition scraped away more of the man he had been yesterday. It revealed the betrayal beneath years of shared dinners, shared dreams, shared trusts. Selena hadn't just overlooked the danger. She had helped craft it. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling where the faint reflection of city lights shimmered. A thought grew quietly inside him, like dawn pushing through fog. He couldn't face this alone. And the only person who had seen the truth early was a girl who shouldn't have been anywhere near that boardroom. He reached for his coat. Meanwhile, in a high-rise condominium overlooking Lake Michigan, Selena Mercer stood in her vast marble kitchen, staring at her own reflection in the window. She held a glass of water, but her fingers trembled so faintly that only she could feel it. Victor Drayton had left an hour earlier, but his presence lingered in the air, the way a storm hangs after lightning. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A single message from Victor. "He's digging. We need to act." Selina closed her eyes. She had always believed herself to be in control, sharp enough to bend people, charming enough to redirect suspicion, careful enough to remain untraceable. But Leon refusing to sign the contract had shifted the ground beneath her feet. The trail was beginning to glow. And once truth starts glowing, it is hard to extinguish. She walked slowly through the shadowed rooms of her penthouse, phone pressed to her ear as Victor's voice heated the space around her. "You knew this could happen," he said calmly. "I didn't think she'd notice," Selina whispered. "A girl with a maintenance badge? This wasn't part of the plan." "Then make sure she doesn't become part of the future," he snapped softly. "Loose ends unravel empires." Selina paced to the balcony doors, snowflakes tapping against the glass. The city stretched below her like a glittering sea. Somewhere out there, a girl had read a line she wasn't meant to read, had spoken words she wasn't meant to speak, and had pushed Selina's world off its delicate axis. Selina tightened her grip on the phone. "I'll handle it." Her reflection on the glass looked unfamiliar, harder, colder. Far below her, on the streets coated in thin snow, Leon Mercer stepped out of a black car in front of an old building whose stone facade carried decades of stories. He entered without hesitation. Inside, under the soft yellow glow of aging lamps, he found Naomi Reyes waiting near the back of the dim hall. Naomi wore a long wool coat, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes softened by a quiet kind of resolve. She rose as Leon approached. "You came," she said simply. "Someone tried to move $3.2 million out of our reserves," Leon replied. "The system blocked it just in time, and the login traces back to someone inside my home." Naomi nodded once, her expression steady. "This isn't only contract fraud. This is coordinated, planned, and from the sound of it, long-running." Leon told her about the clause, about Amina Carter, about Harold Finch's warnings from years ago. He confessed the audio file, the flash drive, and his rising suspicion that his wife had been working with Victor Drayton across multiple collapsed mergers. Naomi waited until he finished, before speaking. "Then you have a bigger responsibility than protecting your company," she said. "You need to protect the girl who saw the truth first." Leon inhaled slowly. "I know." They stood together in the quiet, the air thick with what needed to be done. Outside, snow continued to fall, whispering against the windows like restless thoughts. In her apartment, Amina finally closed her laptop. Her eyes were tired, but her mind was sharp. She had connected enough dots to know she wasn't imagining things. She picked up her notebook and wrote the names again: Dusk Harbor Capital, Victor Drayton, Selina Mercer, the offshore accounts, and drew thin lines between them. 4 collapsed companies. 4 times the same trick worked. One girl who noticed. She stared at the page, then at her own reflection in the darkened window. "We're not done," she whispered. And somewhere in the city, 2 different hearts echoed the same restless truth. Dawn crept over the city in muted strokes of gray and pale gold, painting the skyline with a soft, uncertain light. It was the kind of morning where the world felt caught between rest and awakening, unsure whether to hold its breath or exhale. Amina Carter stood outside Mercer Capital Group's towering entrance with her backpack clutched to her chest, her breath curling into the cold air like small ghosts. She hadn't been invited. She had simply come, because truth rarely waits for permission. Her sneakers, the same borrowed pair from 2 nights before, were already damp from the melting snow. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, trying to keep warm as people in sharp coats swept past her, none giving more than a fleeting glance. The building that had swallowed her courage and spit out consequences now looked even taller, more distant, more guarded. It did not feel like a place that welcomed someone like her. But she remained there, steady, the way a candle remains steady even when wind swirls around it. A soft voice startled her. "Amina?" She looked up to see Evan Drew, a junior analyst she had seen often during late shifts, usually carrying stacks of reports with the exhaustion of someone trying to prove himself. This morning, however, his expression was different, alert, determined. "Mr. Mercer gave instructions," Evan said, lowering his voice. "If you ever came back, I'm supposed to bring you straight up." Amina blinked. "Straight up? As in 31st floor. Come with me." Something like disbelief flickered through her chest. She followed Evan inside, past the security desk that had once watched her with suspicion. Today, no one stopped her. No one questioned her badge. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Amina stepped inside, her reflection trembling faintly in the mirrored walls as the numbers climbed. 22, 23, 28, 31. The doors parted. The hallway on this floor was unfamiliar without the crowd of executives buzzing around it. It felt quieter, gentler somehow. As Evan led her toward a corner room, Amina noticed the blinds were half lowered, slicing slants of weak morning light across a long table covered not with polished decor, but with papers, scattered, overlapping, marked with red pen. Leon Mercer stood near the window, shoulders squared, gaze distant as he watched the snow settling over the city. When he turned, his face was more lined than she remembered, less smooth, less certain, more human. "Thank you, Evan," he said softly. The young analyst nodded and stepped out, closing the door behind him. Suddenly, the room felt even stiller. Leon approached Amina slowly, as though approaching a delicate truth. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for how I treated you, for not listening, for almost signing something that would have destroyed everything I'm responsible for." Amina swallowed. This was not a tone she expected from a man who normally spoke with the weight of an entire corporation behind him. "I wasn't looking for an apology," she said. "I just didn't want you to sign something dangerous." "That," Leon replied gently, "is exactly why I'm apologizing." She looked down at her shoes, the laces slightly frayed. "I'm still the reason my mom lost her job. That won't be for long," he promised quietly, "and none of this has been your fault." He stepped aside, revealing another presence in the room. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm steadiness in her posture. Naomi Reyes rose from her seat, offering Amina a small, respectful nod. "You must be Amina," Naomi said. "Leon's told me about you, and I've read the documents Harold sent you." Amina stiffened. "You read them?" "I did," Naomi replied, her tone warm but firm. "And I need you to understand something. Finding a pattern like this isn't easy. Grown lawyers miss it all the time, but you caught it." Amina felt her cheeks warm, unsure whether to believe praise from someone who carried her name with such weight. Naomi gestured toward the long table. "We've started organizing everything. Your notes, Harold's documents, the blocked transfer attempts, the digital approvals. But we need your memory, your eyes. You saw things in those files that we may overlook just because we're trained to read them differently." Amina stepped closer and saw 5 whiteboards arranged around the room, each filled with lines, arrows, crossouts, and dates, Names sat in tight clusters. Victor Drayton, Dusk Harbor Capital, offshore deposits, 4 collapsed companies, and, etched faintly near the bottom, Selena Mercer. Her breath caught. "You drew all this?" she whispered. Leon nodded. "We tried to chart everything we could confirm, but the timeline is missing pieces. Harold vanished. Documents have gaps. And Victor has powerful friends in quiet offices." Naomi added, "We don't know who inside Mercer Capital first helped him, but we know who is helping him now." Amina stared at the board, her fingers trembling at her sides. "Selena," she said quietly. Leon inhaled deeply. Something in his posture softened, then hardened again. "Yes," he answered. The word hung in the air, a quiet admission, not just of betrayal, but of pain. Leon stepped to the blinds, pulling them open fully. Light flooded in, washing over the boardroom's polished table, catching the faint shine on Amina's borrowed sneakers. Naomi guided Amina toward a smaller board filled with Harold's flagged emails. 12 messages were pinned there, each with underlined phrases. Amina recognized some of her own printed notes, taped alongside Naomi's meticulous handwriting. "I want you to teach us how you saw the pattern," Naomi said. "Show us where your instincts caught the shift. You don't need to know the technical terms. Tell us what felt wrong." Amina frowned, studying the documents. "It wasn't about the big numbers," she said slowly. "It was the way the wording changed. It was too balanced, like someone wrote it to sound harmless but meant it to hide the weight." "That," Naomi said gently, "is exactly how traps are built." For nearly an hour, the three worked together in a rhythm that surprised them all. Leon asked questions without condescension. Naomi translated legal terms into everyday language. Amina pointed at lines, at small discrepancies, at phrases repeated across different contracts. She drew thin pencil lines between offshore transfers and digital authorizations, connecting dots the way someone connects stars into constellations others had overlooked. What she helped them build was not just a diagram. It was a map of 4 years of deception. And in the quiet morning light, Amina Carter, who wiped fingerprints from these walls, found herself standing at the center of the story, not at its edges. Soft footsteps interrupted their focus. Evan returned, looking uneasy. "There's something you should know," he whispered. Leon turned. "What is it?" "Selena's on the executive floor," Evan said, "and she's asking questions about who's been accessing archived files." A hush fell over the room. Amina looked at Leon, her voice barely above a breath. "She knows." Leon nodded slowly. "Then we keep going, but carefully. From this moment on." Naomi placed a reassuring hand on Amina's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time in days, Amina felt the weight inside her chest shift, not disappearing, but rearranging itself into something steadier, something almost like courage. The 31st floor, once a place that towered above her, no longer felt unreachable. Today, she had a seat at the table she used to clean. The sky darkened early that evening, heavy clouds rolling in over the skyline as though the city were bracing itself for something it could not yet name. On the 31st floor of Mercer Capital Group, the quiet war room glowed softly beneath long fluorescent lights. Shadows stretched across the whiteboards where names, arrows, and dates formed a web that grew tighter with every hour. Amina Carter stood before it all, the marker still warm in her hand, while Leon Mercer and Naomi Reyes reviewed the notes she had helped them piece together. 4 collapses, Naomi murmured, tapping the board gently. 4 shifts of responsibility hidden behind language crafted to feel routine. And each time, money flows the same direction. Amina nodded. Like the tide, quiet but steady. And always ending in that offshore trail, Leon added. Bermuda, the Seychelles, Luxembourg. 3 safe harbors for stolen gain. Naomi smiled gently at Amina. That comparison you made earlier, the thing about balance that feels too perfect, that was sharp. People hide manipulation in neat symmetry. Lawyers use it all the time. It just felt wrong, Amina said softly. It was wrong, Naomi replied. But the moment of quiet understanding broke when Evan Drew rushed in, breathing hard. You need to hear this, he said. Selena, she's not just asking around. She's calling in favors. Leon straightened. What kind of favors? Evan swallowed. High-level ones. A silence heavier than fear filled the room. Amina felt her stomach tighten, as though the floor beneath her had shifted a few inches to the left. Leon moved toward his desk, lowered the blinds, and locked the door. Start from the beginning, he instructed. Evan glanced at Amina, then back to Leon. She had a private meeting on the executive floor about an hour ago. She asked which servers had been accessed over the past week. Then she pressed the compliance team about who pulled old contract drafts from archive storage. She doesn't know it was Amina specifically, but she knows someone is looking. Naomi's voice lowered, steady but grim. And Selena doesn't handle suspicion lightly. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, rattling the windows like a warning. Amina felt her pulse quicken. If she already suspects, then, Naomi interrupted gently, then this becomes bigger than uncovering fraud. This becomes about protection. Evan wasn't finished. He glanced at the door, his voice dropping further. There was something else. A man in a dark coat visited the floor. I think he was with Victor Drayton. He handed Selena a folder. Thick one. I only saw the corner of it as he walked by. Leon's jaw tightened. Victor's moving faster than I expected. Evan nodded, hesitating before adding, whatever's in that folder, it didn't look like business documents. Naomi exchanged a look with Leon, one of those silent conversations adults have when the truth is too dangerous to speak plainly. Amina felt the shift now. Not fear exactly, but the realization that she was no longer dealing with a puzzle inside a contract. She was dealing with people who knew how to bury anyone who got too close. Naomi stepped closer to Amina. Listen to me, she said gently. The moment Victor thinks a threat exists, he tries to erase it. He's done it before, through intimidation, through pressure, through people who owe him favors. So what now? Amina asked, voice tight. Now, Naomi said, we prepare. They moved quickly. Leon pulled out a locked tablet containing internal access logs, while Naomi opened her legal case folder and began drafting protective motions. Amina reorganized Harold's printouts, grouping the files into categories they could present later. Contracts, transfer paths, archived approvals, offshore movement patterns. The room filled with the quiet tension of people working in the space between fear and resolve. But the storm outside wasn't the only one forming. Across the city, in a penthouse lit by dim golden lamps, Selena Mercer stood beside Victor Drayton, a thick black folder resting between them on a marble countertop. Victor flipped open the cover. Inside lay printouts of school records, social media traces, a blurred photo of Amina standing outside the library, and a street view shot of the Carters' apartment building. Selena inhaled sharply. Is this really necessary? Victor's smile held no warmth. You said Leon is hesitating, that he's pulling away. This girl is the reason. remove her, and the hesitation goes with her. Selena closed the folder, but her hands trembled. She's 17. And she's in the way, Victor replied. Loose ends unravel carefully crafted structures. She talked once. She could talk again. Selena pressed her knuckles against her mouth. Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't sign up for hurting a child. You signed up for winning, Victor said calmly. You knew what the stakes were the first time you approved a fraudulent clause. You helped build this entire system. Don't act surprised that someone's in the path. He leaned closer. If you won't handle it, I will. Selena didn't answer. That silence said everything. Back in the war room, the first text message arrived on Amina's phone like a cold fingertip trailing down her spine. Stop digging, she froze. Naomi. Naomi took the phone, eyes narrowing. A second message arrived before she could speak. Or we dig first. Leon closed his eyes briefly. They're escalating. Naomi lifted her chin. Then we escalate legally. But Amina wasn't finished reading. A third message appeared. We know where you live. Elaine's face flashed in her mind, her mother folding laundry under warm kitchen lights, unaware of the danger creeping toward them. Amina wasn't ready for this. She wasn't trained. She wasn't protected. She was just a girl from the lower floors of a glass tower that hadn't wanted her anywhere near its decisions. Yet her voice didn't tremble when she said, "They're trying to scare me." Naomi replied softly, "It means they're afraid of what you know." Leon stepped closer. "Amina, we'll file for immediate protection, a restraining order, cybersecurity review. I'll speak to the head of security myself." Amina nodded, gripping her backpack for strength. "I'm not walking away." Naomi looked at her as though seeing something new. "You understand what this could become?" "Yes," Amina said. "And I also understand what happens if no one stops them." Snow battered the windows harder now, wind pushing against the glass like a restless force. The storm outside felt strangely connected to the storm inside the tower. Leon moved to the center whiteboard and circled the last item at the bottom of the diagram: public exposure. "We can't file a lawsuit yet," Naomi said. "Not until we have enough proof. But we can slow them down, and we can protect you while we gather more." "How?" Amina asked. "By letting the truth breathe," Naomi answered. "By giving people something Victor and Selena can't control. Eyes outside their world." Amina watched as Naomi drafted a preliminary injunction request. Her handwriting neat, deliberate. Leon reviewed the blocked transfer logs again, reading them aloud slowly so Amina could understand each detail. The words were softened, no technical terms, just descriptions of attempts to move money that shouldn't have been moved. For a moment, the room felt united. 3 people from 3 different lives, all pulled into the same circle of truth. But truth rarely moves quietly. Outside the door, footsteps echoed, not rushed, measured, intentional. A knock followed, a single sharp rap that seemed to cut the air in half. Naomi exchanged a look with Leon. Evan's voice came through the door, low and tense. "She's here," he said. "Selena is on this floor, and she's asking who's in this room." Amina felt the world tilt slightly. Naomi closed her legal file. Leon straightened his suit jacket. The lights hummed softly overhead. The counterattack had begun, and the 31st floor was no longer a room of quiet strategy. It had become a battlefield. The city glittered beneath a clear winter night, its skyline sharp against the dark like a crown of glass. Inside the grand ballroom of the Mercer Trust Foundation, golden chandeliers spilled warm light onto polished floors, and hundreds of guests moved like currents in an elegant river. Donors, executives, socialites, journalists. The annual gala was always a spectacle of wealth and influence, the kind of evening where every smile hid an agenda and every compliment masked a calculation. Tonight, however, something was different. A quiet tremor lay beneath the music and laughter, an undercurrent of whispers that slipped through the air like drifting smoke. Everyone had heard the rumor. The billion-dollar deal between Mercer Capital Group and Drayton International had stalled. Whispers spread through the room in soft ripples about internal concerns, hidden liabilities, and anonymous warning. No one knew the details, but everyone sensed the tension. At the center of the room, where she had always stood like a star pinned onto a velvet sky, Selena Mercer glided from conversation to conversation, wrapped in a silver gown. Her smile shone, but her eyes darted subtly, searching for something or someone. She managed each greeting with flawless grace, yet beneath the shimmer of her presence was an unease she could not conceal, a shadow that lingered no matter how brightly the lights glowed. Across the ballroom, Leon Mercer stood near the stage, holding a folded sheet of notes he had barely looked at. He usually prepared speeches meticulously, down to the cadence of each sentence. Not tonight. Tonight, every practiced word felt false on his tongue. He had passed mirrors on his way through the hall. They reflected a man caught between two worlds, the one he spent years building, and the one he had nearly lost by trusting the wrong people. Naomi Reyes lingered near the edge of the room, observing everything. Her dark gown blended her into the crowd, but her eyes missed nothing. She had come as a silent anchor, knowing Leon would need her support. She held no glass of champagne, no clutch, no pretense, only a quiet readiness. The kind that comes from knowing truth rarely walks into a room unaccompanied. The orchestra softened its music. A hush fell across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer called, "please welcome Mr. Leon Mercer." Leon stepped forward. Cameras lifted instantly. A row of journalists angled their phones. Selena's smile froze. Victor Drayton, standing near the back, straightened slightly, as if bracing himself. Leon reached the podium and looked over the room, taking a slow breath. He didn't search for the right words. He simply allowed the truth to rise the way dawn rises, quietly at first, then steadily, refusing to hide. "Tonight," he began, "I'm supposed to speak about achievements, about growth, about the bright future of our foundation." His voice carried with unexpected softness, but none of that feels honest. The murmurs quieted. Leon continued, "This past week, I learned something crucial, not from any board member or advisor, but from a young woman far braver than I was. She saw something my entire leadership missed, something I should have seen." A ripple moved through the crowd, curious and electric. "I have made mistakes," Leon said. "Real ones. Mistakes I can't dress in optimism or polish with corporate language. I ignored signs. I trusted the wrong people. I let confidence guide me when caution should have." Selena's hand tightened around her champagne glass, knuckles whitening. Leon's gaze drifted toward the ballroom doors, as if imagining someone far from the chandelier light. But someone, just 17 years old, walked into the room where I was about to sign everything away, and said a simple truth, that the language in our contract wasn't right, that I was being led into a trap. Soft gasps flitted through the room. Victor Drayton's jaw tightened in the shadows. "I don't know how she found the courage to speak," Leon said, "but I know what it cost her. And I know that sometimes wisdom comes from the very floors we overlook." The ballroom remained still. No movement, no clinking glasses, only the weight of his confession settling over everyone. "Tonight," he concluded, "I want to honor that courage, because integrity doesn't depend on titles, and truth doesn't care about status." He stepped away from the podium. Cameras tried to catch him, but Leon simply walked off stage, letting the room absorb the quiet earthquake he had left behind. Selena's eyes followed him, cold, calculating, stung. Victor's expression sharpened with displeasure. Naomi exhaled slowly, as if a tight wire had loosened inside her chest. Miles away, unaware of the murmured shock spreading through the ballroom, Amina Carter sat at the small desk in her bedroom, a single lamp casting warm light across her notes. Her hair was wrapped in a loose bun, and her hands were smudged with pencil marks from tracing patterns late into the night. Her phone buzzed. A notification. A live stream clip from the gala. She opened it. Leon's voice filled the room, soft through her speaker, carrying the weight of both apology and resolve. She watched in silence, watched him name courage without naming her, watched him stand alone under a chandelier that suddenly seemed too bright for comfort. Something inside her tightened and then eased, like a knot slowly untying. Her breath trembled. She looked down at the documents scattered across her desk, and then at her own reflection in the darkened window. For the first time since the boardroom, she let herself feel something other than fear or urgency. She felt seen, but the moment didn't last long. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from an unknown number. "You're becoming a problem." Another followed. "Stop now." Amina stared at the messages, a coldness settling beneath her ribs. She closed her eyes, breathed out slowly, then reached for her notebook. She uncapped her marker, pressed it to a fresh page, and wrote 3 words in thick, determined strokes. Not, backing, down. The letters were bold, uneven, but steady. When she pinned the page above her desk, it fluttered slightly in the faint heat from the radiator, as if nodding to her quietly. Back in the ballroom, Selena excused herself from a conversation with the brittle grace of someone trying not to crack. She stepped onto a balcony overlooking the frozen river, breath fogging in the cold air. Victor followed moments later, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "You lost control," Victor murmured, stepping closer. Selena didn't answer. "And he mentioned her," he added. "That girl." Selena's jaw tightened. "He didn't say her name." "He didn't need to," Victor replied. Selena stared at the icy reflections on the water below. She felt the walls of the world she had built pressing inward. A single girl with a maintenance badge had shaken the foundation she once believed unbreakable. "We'll handle it," Victor said. "But the window is closing." Selena said nothing. Her silence tasted like regret and fear and something harsher, something she was beginning to understand too late. Far above the ballroom, snow drifted beneath the yellow glow of streetlights, falling softly across the city. Somewhere inside that quiet descent, 3 lives shifted course. Leon stepping into truth, Amina holding her line, and Selena feeling the first crack forming beneath her perfect surface. Morning crept over the city in slow gray sheets, softening the sharp lines of buildings that just hours before glittered with gala lights. Snow from the night's quiet storm clung to rooftops and railings, giving the world a muted calm, a deceptive calm, the kind that lingers right before a story breaks open. Amina Carter woke with her notebook still open beside her pillow, the page reading "not," backing, down, staring up at her like a promise she had made to herself while the rest of the city slept. She rubbed her eyes, pulled on a sweater, and walked to the kitchen where her mother Elaine stood at the stove, flipping simple pancakes in a pan that had seen better years. "You didn't sleep much," Elaine said gently. "A little," Amina lied. Elaine didn't push. She never did. She poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs, handing one to her daughter. "Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone." Amina wanted to believe that, but the newest messages on her phone made her stomach knot. "Problem. Stop now. We know who you are." Each word felt colder than the last. Still, she sipped her tea, steadying herself. Outside, the city hummed awake, and the world, without her meaning it to, was beginning to look her way. By mid-morning, whispers had grown into reports. A financial news blog published a short, cautious piece. "Merger on hold after internal concerns at Mercer Capital Group." Within an hour, a larger outlet picked up the story, then another, then 2 more. Soon the story appeared on morning talk shows, complete with round-table speculation and clipped sound bites of Leon Mercer's unexpected speech from the night before. An anonymous insider had stopped the deal. A hidden clause had been found. Rumors of internal conflict. A potential whistleblower. Reporters didn't have much yet, but they had enough to sense a storm. In a newsroom across town, a journalist with tired eyes and too much coffee scrolled through early chatter and whispered to her editor, "This isn't normal. Somebody inside Mercer must have lit the match." And though the public didn't know her name, the match had been a girl who once cleaned fingerprints off office doors. At the Mercer Capital headquarters, Leon stood behind a podium for a brief press statement. The room was filled with cameras, microphones, and the anxious undercurrent of people smelling a major story. Naomi Reyes stood on one side of him, her expression composed, hands clasped calmly. 2 federal agents, Agent Alvarez and Agent Knox, stood just behind them, not speaking, not moving, their presence alone injecting gravity into the moment. Leon rested his palms lightly on the podium. When he spoke, his voice carried the same tone from the gala, soft, steady, unadorned. "We have paused the merger to conduct a deeper review. This decision reflects not uncertainty, but responsibility. A significant concern was raised internally, one that I did not see, and one I should have seen. Someone far younger than me, without title or influence, recognized the danger before any of us." Cameras flashed like lightning across the room. "I won't disclose her name," Leon continued, "but I will say this: courage can come from anywhere, and this company owes its safety to a young person who had every reason to stay silent and every right to walk away, but didn't." Naomi stepped forward. "We are cooperating with regulatory bodies to review the legal and financial integrity of the deal. Our priority is safety of investors, employees, and the young witness who put herself at risk by speaking up." A reporter called out, "Is the whistleblower in danger?" Naomi didn't flinch. "Anyone who threatens her will find themselves answering to the law." Across town, Amina watched the live stream from her living room. Elaine hovered behind her, fingers twisting nervously. They listened to Leon's words, not just the content, but the weight behind them. Elaine's hand gently touched her daughter's shoulder. "He's telling the truth," she murmured, "and he's not letting you face this by yourself." Amina nodded. though a tightness still pressed against her ribs. She appreciated Leon's defense, but it didn't erase the threat messages. It didn't erase the cold folder Selena held last night. It didn't erase the picture of her apartment that Victor Drayton had glanced at with interest. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a different message. From an unknown number, but not a threatening one. 2 simple words. "Thank you." Amina stared at them. Someone out there, maybe an employee, maybe someone watching the press conference, had sent kindness into the storm. It wasn't much. But it was enough to remind her she wasn't as small as she felt. She tucked her phone away, breathing in slowly, letting warmth seep back into her chest. Later that afternoon, a neighbor knocked on their apartment door, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Aldridge, who often smiled at Amina in the elevator. She stood there now in her oversized winter coat, holding a sheet of poster board. "I don't know what's happening," she said softly, "but I do know this building stands behind you. If someone tries to scare you, they'll have to go through all of us." She handed Amina the sign. In thick marker, it read, "Truth has no age." As she walked away, Amina felt something shift inside her, something steadier than fear. But not everyone viewing the unfolding story felt solidarity. In a private suite of the Lakeshore Grand Hotel, Selena Mercer and Victor Drayton watched the news on a muted screen. The caption at the bottom of the broadcast read, "Insider stops merger. CEO acknowledges young observer." Selena's jaw clenched. "He's exposing everything," she said, her voice tight. Victor didn't look away from the screen. "He's exposing himself. He thinks he can control the narrative by admitting guilt, but he's only made the girl more valuable." Selena turned sharply. "More valuable to who?" "To the media, to regulators, to anyone who wants a story." Victor lowered his glass onto the table. "And valuable people are dangerous, especially when they're unpredictable." Selena exhaled shakily. "You said we could scare her into silence." "And I still can," Victor replied, voice cold. "But now we need to be smarter, precision, not pressure." Selena looked away. Her reflection fractured in the window's dark glass. "I never wanted it to go this far." It already has. Back on the bus ride home, Amina sat by the window, watching buildings blur into streaks of light. Her backpack sat on her lap, heavy with notes and the sign from Mrs. Aldridge. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass as the bus rumbled toward her neighborhood. At the Lakeshore Grand Hotel, Victor saw movement outside, a city bus rolling by the front entrance. And there, through the glowing window, he recognized a face he had only seen in photos. Amina, seated quietly, watching the world pass, his eyes narrowed, his mind calculated, and somewhere in his expression, a decision formed. A decision that would make the next chapter of her journey even more dangerous. But Amina did not see him. She saw only her own reflection in the bus window, the reflection of a girl who had once cleaned floors and now found herself at the edge of a battle larger than she could have imagined. She did not feel fear in that moment. She felt clarity, and clarity, she was learning, could be powerful enough to push back whole towers of glass. The courthouse rose like an old stone sentinel against the gray morning sky, its steps lined with reporters clutching microphones as if they were shields. Winter air wrapped around the crowd in thin, sharp strands, but the murmurs of anticipation warmed the space with restless energy. People whispered about the halted merger, about offshore accounts and hidden clauses, about the mysterious young witness no one had yet seen. The story had grown legs, then wings, and now hovered over the city like a restless bird waiting to land. Inside courtroom 12B, light filtered through tall windows and settled in pale pools across the polished wooden benches. The gallery filled quickly, journalists scribbling notes, employees from Mercer Capital whispering to each other, curious strangers leaning forward in their seats. On the left side, Victor Drayton sat in a charcoal suit, his posture relaxed, his smile faint and rehearsed. Selena Mercer sat beside him, fingers intertwined but tense, as if holding herself together. Naomi Reyes stood at the plaintiff's table, adjusting her files with slow deliberation. She was calm, almost serene, the way a seasoned violinist might prepare before drawing the bow across the first note. Next to her sat Leon Mercer, hands resting flat on the table, the tension in his shoulders visible but contained. He was not here as a CEO today. He was here as a man who had nearly lost everything to lies he hadn't realized he was standing on. Then the door at the back of the courtroom opened. Amina Carter stepped inside. There was no dramatic entrance, no spotlight, no music, just a 17-year-old girl in a navy sweater, walking with steady, careful steps. But the room shifted. Conversations stopped. Pens paused. A ripple of recognition moved through the gallery, even among those who had only heard whispers about her. She looked too young to be carrying so much. Yet something in her eyes, quiet resolve, the kind you don't learn in school, kept the room from underestimating her. She took her seat behind Naomi, smoothing her skirt with trembling fingers. Elaine slipped in moments later, sitting close enough for Amina to feel her presence. A mother's worry filled the space like a protective cloak. Then the judge entered, a woman with silver hair pulled back tightly, her expression stern yet thoughtful. The room rose, then settled once more. "Court is now in session," she said, her voice echoing softly. Naomi began with an overview of the case, how 4 different companies had collapsed under suspiciously similar circumstances, how each carried the weight of liabilities they weren't meant to hold, how money flowed like a quiet river into a shell company called Dusk Harbor Capital, and how offshore accounts caught that river in places far from public view. She explained everything slowly, translating each term into simple human language, the kind that doesn't hide behind jargon or cold phrases. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Then she called her first witness, a forensic accountant who explained the pattern of quarterly transfers, describing them not as illegal transactions, but as money movements designed to look ordinary until you follow where they end. The gallery leaned in. Charts were shown. No numbers, but gentle diagrams Naomi narrated like a story. Arrows, circles, dates. A web people could understand without needing to know the tools behind it. Victor's attorney objected to some descriptions, calling them speculative. The judge allowed the testimony to continue, her tone firm. Next came a former compliance officer who spoke about internal warnings ignored, about approvals logged using credentials she could not legally name, but whose patterns matched a very specific signature. Each piece was a thread. Each thread pointed to one place. Selena shifted uncomfortably, her jaw tightening. Then Naomi turned toward Amina. "Amina Carter," she said gently. "Would you take the stand, please?" A hush dropped over the room. Amina rose, her hands trembling slightly, but her steps steady. She walked to the witness stand and placed her palm on the oath book, her voice small but clear as she swore to tell the truth. Naomi approached slowly. "Amina, thank you for being here. I know this isn't easy." "It's okay," Amina whispered. "Let's begin with something simple. Naomi continued. Can you tell the court why you were on the 31st floor the night you found the document? Amina inhaled. I was helping my mom. She's part of the night cleaning crew. Were you looking for anything in particular? No, she said. I was just tidying the copy room. And what happened next? Amina described finding the folder in the printer tray, how she had opened it out of instinct more than curiosity, how she had read the words slowly, aware she didn't fully understand them, but certain something felt out of place. She pointed out the line she had locked into memory, the subtle shift of responsibility that moved weight from one company to another like a quiet sleight of hand. Naomi didn't interrupt. She let Amina speak at her own pace, the gentle rhythm of her voice making even the legal concepts feel like pieces of a story, not abstract rules. And when you realized the danger of that line, Naomi asked, what did you do? I tried to tell someone, Amina said softly. I told my mom, then. I told Mr. Mercer. I didn't know if I was right. I just didn't want him to sign something that looked like a trap. Her honesty drifted across the room like warm breath in winter. Behind the defense table, Victor watched closely, eyes narrowed. And what happened after you spoke up in the boardroom? Naomi asked. Amina paused, then said, I was escorted out, and my mom lost her job the next morning. Gasps fluttered through the gallery. But even then, Naomi said gently, you didn't stop. No, Amina replied, because the line didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something someone meant to hide, and traps don't go away just because no one talks about them. What made you keep looking? Naomi asked. Amina hesitated. Because people think someone like me doesn't understand these things. They think we only clean the floors, that we're too far below the important stuff to see what's wrong. But cleaning floors means you see everything people drop, everything they leave behind. And sometimes, what they leave behind is the truth. She looked directly at the jury then, her voice steadying. Just because I clean your floors doesn't mean I don't see the dirt. The room fell silent. Naomi let the words sit, their weight settling gently over the wood and marble. Then came cross-examination. Victor's lawyer approached with a tight smile. Amina, you're very young. Would you say you're trained to understand legal language? No, she answered. So it's fair to say you could have misinterpreted what you read? I could have, Amina admitted, but I didn't. And how can you be so sure? She lifted her chin slightly. Because when something feels wrong, it usually is. I don't need to know every term. I just need to see when someone is being set up to take the blame. The lawyer blinked, caught off guard by the clarity of her answer. When the cross-examination ended, Amina stepped down. She walked back to her seat, heart hammering, but with a steadiness growing inside her like sunlight pushing through thin clouds. As she sat, Leon leaned slightly toward her. You did more than tell the truth, he whispered. You made sure the room heard it. And for the first time since stepping into that boardroom days ago, Amina felt a quiet sense of belonging, not to the world of polished glass and power, but to the truth itself. The jury returned just before noon, their footsteps soft against the polished floor as they filed back into the courtroom. Outside, a pale winter sun hovered behind thin clouds, casting a muted glow that barely reached the tall windows of courtroom 12B. But inside, the atmosphere was electric, tense, fragile, as if the entire room were holding its breath at once. Amina Carter sat between Naomi Reyes and her mother, Elaine, hands folded tightly in her lap. She could feel Elaine's hand resting lightly on her back, steady and warm, anchoring her even as her heart thudded like a quiet drum. Across the room, Victor Drayton leaned back in his chair with a thin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Selina Mercer sat upright beside him, her posture rigid, her jaw clenched so tightly it might crack. The judge took her seat, tapping her gavel gently. "Members of the jury," she said, "have you reached a verdict?" A woman in the front row stood, holding the verdict form in slightly trembling hands. "We have." Her voice traveled across the courtroom like a delicate thread drawn through silence. She unfolded the paper. In the case of Mercer Capital Group versus Drayton International Holdings and associated parties, we find the defendants guilty on all counts. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Guilty of orchestrating a multi-year pattern of financial deception. Guilty of forging authorizations and disguising their trail. Guilty of engineering collapses that cost hundreds their jobs. Guilty of tampering with contractual obligations to shift blame onto unsuspecting companies. Victor's smile vanished in a single blink. The judge continued, her tone measured and firm. Given the severity of these offenses, the court sentences Victor Drayton and Selina Mercer each to 12 years in federal custody, with a minimum of 8 years served before eligible review. No harsh legal words were needed, just the quiet clarity of what those years meant. 12 years away from high-rise offices and polished boardrooms. 12 years away from the power they once bent so easily. 12 years for the damage they had spread like invisible cracks through the companies they touched. Selina closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, tears clung to her lashes, not soft tears, not grieving tears, but the cold, stunned tears of someone seeing the truth of their own decisions reflected back at them for the first time. Victor didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He simply stared at the front of the courtroom, jaw tight, as if refusing to acknowledge the collapse of a world he had once believed unshakable. Amina exhaled slowly. It wasn't triumph she felt. It wasn't victory. It was relief, the quiet kind that settles softly, like fresh snow on a long, empty street. The gavel fell once more, and just like that, the room dissolved into movement. Reporters surged forward, voices rising, cameras flashing in brief bursts. Court officers began escorting Victor and Selina away, their footsteps echoing in the long hallway outside. Naomi gathered her folders calmly, the corners of her mouth lifting into the faintest, most exhausted smile. Elaine brushed a strand of hair away from Amina's cheek, the gesture gentle, almost reverent. "You did it," Elaine whispered. "We did it," Amina corrected softly. Leon Mercer approached, his expression warm despite the shadows beneath his eyes. "Your testimony changed the entire course of this case, Amina," he said. "You didn't just tell the truth. You made them hear it." Amina nodded, unsure what to say. Praise felt strange, heavy. She had not entered this wanting attention or recognition. She just didn't want someone else to be hurt by a signature meant to disguise a trap. Naomi slipped her briefcase over her shoulder. "Let's get you outside," she said. "There are a lot of cameras. We'll keep it brief." They stepped into the icy air outside the courthouse. A cluster of reporters immediately swarmed forward, but the federal agents kept them at a respectful distance. Microphones tilted in Naomi's direction. She delivered a short statement, clear, respectful, focused on the facts and on the protection of the young witness beside her. But the question everyone wanted an answer to cut through the crowd. "Amina," A journalist called out gently. "What do you want people to remember from all of this?" Amina hesitated. The wind caught her hair, lifting strands across her cheeks. She looked at the cameras, bright, unblinking eyes, and then at the courthouse walls behind her, tall and weathered by time. She thought of the broom closets and copy rooms where she had spent nights cleaning. She thought of the line in the contract that had looked so small yet held the weight of an avalanche. She thought of all the people who never expect someone like her to see anything important. Finally, she spoke. "I want people to remember that truth doesn't need a title," she said, her voice steady. "And justice doesn't care how clean your shoes are." The crowd fell silent for a breath. Then pens began scribbling. Cameras clicked again. Later that week, Mercer Capital Group faced the painstaking process of rebuilding. But it did not collapse. Instead, it began to reshape itself, brick by ethical brick. Selina's name was erased from every board record. Drayton-linked accounts were frozen, compliance protocols were rewritten, and Naomi Reyes was invited to serve as Chief Ethics Counsel, a role she accepted with quiet dignity. The building felt different after that, lighter somehow, as if opening the blinds had let in light it hadn't realized it needed. One afternoon, in a conference room no longer haunted by half-spoken threats, Leon invited Amina to join him. On the table lay a newly printed document, embossed with the Mercer Trust Foundation seal. He slid it toward her. "The Amina Carter Fellowship," he said softly. "Full scholarship support, mentorship, a path forward for anyone who sees the truth when the rest of us miss it." Amina touched the embossed letters with the tips of her fingers. "Why me?" she whispered. Leon smiled gently. "Because you reminded us that floors aren't just meant to be walked on. Sometimes they hold up the people who see things before anyone else does." A week later, Amina stood in her small bedroom holding an envelope, the one containing her acceptance letter from Columbia University. She carried it to Mercer Capital and handed it to Leon, who placed it on a shelf above his desk next to a plaque that read, "Truth isn't loud, but it lasts." The plaque glinted as sunlight filtered in through the window. Somewhere far from the skyscrapers and their polished glass, in a quiet cell surrounded by concrete walls, Selina Mercer lay awake on a narrow bed. She stared at the pale ceiling as Amina's words replayed in her mind, words that refused to fade no matter how dark the room became. "Just because I clean your floors doesn't mean I don't see the dirt." In the stillness of her confinement, those words settled in like echoes she could not outrun. And miles away, in a small apartment warmed by chamomile tea and relief, Amina finally slept. Not because the world was perfect, but because she had refused to look away from the truth when it mattered most.